Hello, hi. Good day for everyone. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Maciej, and I would like to welcome you to the webinar by Datapolis, 3 Must-Have SharePoint Workflows. With me today is Vlad Catrinescu, independent SharePoint consultant from Montreal, Canada, and a SharePoint MVP. He will host today's presentation. After the presentation, there will be, of course, some time for questions and answers. So if you will have any, feel free to ask them. You can write them in the chat box or raise your hand using the GoToWebinar software. We will try to keep the whole webinar in an hour, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. That depends on the questions you'll ask. But anyway, not to keep you too long, I think we're ready to start. Okay, Vlad, so I am giving you the screen right now.
Hello, everybody. Give me 1 second.
Fine.
Do you all see the SharePoint screen?
Yep, I think it's fine. We're ready to go.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on 3 must-have SharePoint workflows hosted by Datapolis. Before we start, let me present myself. My name is Vlad Catrinescu. I'm an independent SharePoint consultant from Montreal, Canada. I have 6 years of experience in IT, and the last 4 of them have been strictly SharePoint. I'm a big PowerShell and automation fan in general, and I'm also a SharePoint Server MVP as well as a Microsoft trainer. You might know me online from founding the biggest SharePoint community on the web, which is sharepoint-community.net, and also from my blog, absolutesharepoint.com. Let's take a look at what we will talk about today. We will first start with a very general introduction to SharePoint workflows, what we can do with them, and what tools do we use to create them. Afterwards, we'll start looking at our 3 workflows, starting with the holiday workflow. We will then go over some theory, and then we will look at it in action and see how we created it with SharePoint Designer. We will then look at a purchase approval workflow, and we'll cover theory as well as how to do it in SharePoint again. And lastly, we'll look at a very popular onboarding workflow and how we created it, as well as how we can do it with a third-party product such as Datapolis. In all the workflows today, you will learn lots of tips and tricks that you can apply to all your future workflows, no matter what they are. Lastly, we'll have a questions and answer session where you can ask me anything you want. Without further talking, let's start. Workflows introduction. First of all, what exactly are SharePoint workflows? SharePoint workflows are pre-programmed mini applications that streamline and automate a wide variety of business processes, from collecting signatures, feedback, or approvals for a plan or document to tracking the current status of a routine procedure. SharePoint workflows are designed to save you time and effort and to bring consistency and efficiency to tasks that you perform on a regular basis. So basically, SharePoint has been one of the most used intranet software in the past 5 years and workflows have been a big part of that because they allow businesses to streamline their procedures and save time and effort, and that's the biggest point of workflows. Now, what tools do we need? What tools do we have to create those workflows? There are 3 main tools that we can use. The first tool is SharePoint Designer, and that's what we will be using mostly during this webinar. We'll talk a bit more about SharePoint Designer later. However, this is the go-to power user tool that everybody can access for free. The next tool is Visual Studio. Visual Studio allows you to create a lot more powerful workflows than SharePoint Designer, and you can do almost everything you want in SharePoint. However, you need to have developers that know how to code in order to create those powerful workflows. Lastly, we have third-party software such as Datapolis that allows you to create workflow solutions that are as powerful as Visual Studio. However, there is a price tag attached to them because you have to buy them. But it will empower your business users to do very powerful workflows without knowing how to code. Now, let's take a look at SharePoint Designer and what's it meant for and what's the target audience. Over here, I have the definition taken from Microsoft's site. Let's take a look at it. SharePoint Designer 2013 is the tool of choice for the rapid development of SharePoint applications. Using SharePoint Designer, advanced users and developers alike can rapidly create SharePoint solutions in response to business needs. Advanced users can compose no-code solutions that encompass a variety of common scenarios from collaborative sites and web publishing line of business data integration, business intelligence solutions, and human workflows by leveraging the building blocks available in SharePoint in an easy-to-use environment. In addition, developers can use SharePoint Designer 2013 to get a quick start on SharePoint development projects. I'm sure that you agree with me that this definition is really boring and that Microsoft made SharePoint Designer look as the go-to tool for whatever you want to do in SharePoint. Go to SharePoint Designer, it's the best. However, SharePoint Designer was really meant for business users and power users. You'll very rarely see a developer go in SharePoint Designer because they hate it. SharePoint Designer is made to create no-code solutions such as workflows, site templates, creating lists, hiding a field, and stuff like that for business users. So if you are developers, most of the developers will never have to open it. Before we go further, where can we apply what we learned today? Since I will be using SharePoint Designer and I will be using the SharePoint 2010 workflow mode, you can apply everything we learned today in SharePoint Server 2010, SharePoint Server 2013, as well as SharePoint Online. So I hope you all have one of those so you can apply it to your environment, whatever it is. Now let's take a look at some SharePoint Designer workflow terms that I'm going to use today. First of all, there are two types of items in SharePoint Designer workflows. The first type are actions. Actions are things that we do with workflows. Some examples are like creating a task or updating a task, sending an email, or prompting for values and stuff like that. You can play with lists, play with list items. That is an action, something we do. The other type is conditions. When do we do those actions? For example, if a file was created by somebody, if a file is a document file or a list file or a PDF file, we can have different actions depending on those conditions. So we can really do some intelligent stuff in the background. Let's take a look at how can we start a SharePoint Designer workflow. A SharePoint Designer workflows has three main ways to get started. The first one and the most popular one is on item creation. So as soon as an item is created, the workflow starts in the background and the approval process or your custom process is going to start. The second one is on item modification. So for example, as soon as your list item is changed, it starts the workflow again. Those two are often used in conjunction, so some people do, when the item is created or modified, just start the workflow. This is very popular mostly for list items. However, for documents, you can also start the approval process or your custom workflow manually, because you do not want to launch your custom workflow on every draft document. You only want to launch it on major versions. So you can, of course, start it manually as well. Now let's take a look at what types of workflows do we have. The first type is a reusable workflow. Reusable workflows by default don't have the context of a specific list or library. Therefore, by default, they provide only the columns that are common across lists and libraries, such as created and created by. You can create a reusable list workflow in the top-level site collection, and that workflow can be made globally reusable, meaning that the workflow can be associated to any list, library, or content type in that site collection. The second type is a list workflow, and that's what we're going to use today. A list workflow is the type of workflow that is available since SharePoint Server 2007. Because it has the context of the list for which it was created, list workflows automatically have access to the values of the custom fields for the list item which they will run. For example, if you have a custom field called notes, comments, or username. For example, you can access those, you can change those, you can do conditions based on those, and so on. However, list workflows cannot be made available to other lists or library on this or other sites. If you want to have the same workflow functionality for multiple lists, you must manually recreate this workflow in all the locations. Lastly, we have the site workflow. The site workflow is associated to a site, not to a list, library, or content type. So unlike most workflows, a site workflow is not running on a specific list item. Because of this, many of the actions that are available for items are not available for site workflows. One good example is if you want to provide users for a feedback about your site workflow, a site workflow is the way to go. Now, let's go to our 3 workflows. We're going to start with the holiday approval workflow. You might ask yourself, why a holiday approval workflow? Well, everybody needs some time off, right? However, sometimes for employees it can be a hassle to get their holidays approved because they send an email to their manager and they don't know what's happening with it. On the other side, it's really tough sometimes for managers because they get an email but they don't have the full view of who else is on vacation. Do I still have enough people working? So let's take a look at more information before we go into SharePoint Designer. For a holiday workflow, the approval process is pretty easy. You usually only have the manager that has to approve. You don't have a complicated 10 people having to approve your holidays. It's only your direct manager. However, there are quite a few constraints, like who will replace the employee who is gone on holiday? Do we still have enough people working to advance all the projects that go on during this time? How does a manager easily view all the current holiday requests? So if I have 3 people asking me for a holiday at the same time, how do I easily view what's happening? Which ones can I approve without promising people their vacation and then being like, sorry guys, I didn't estimate well, so you cannot go on vacation. There have been a lot of holiday approval workflows, and your basic SharePoint workflow way to do it is pretty easy. You look up the manager of the user who created the list item, you start an approval process, and you stop a workflow. However, this would be too easy to show in this webinar, so I'm going to add a twist to this. So without further talking, let's open up SharePoint Designer. I'm here on my SharePoint site, and as you can see, I have my holiday approval list. I will first show you the demo. I will first show you how the workflow works from the end user perspective, and then we will open SharePoint Designer and I'll show you how it works in the background. So let's create a new holiday request. Title, let's say summer vacation, going from this Thursday to next week, and I'll enter no comments. Save. By the way, all the workflows that I'm going to show you today are in SharePoint Online. So sometimes I did some custom email actions. However, SharePoint Online, and it's good for you if you ever want to play with it in the future, the emails can take up to 30 hours to send. So if you ever have a workflow in which you send somebody an email and you're trying to troubleshoot why the emails don't work, don't stress on it. It can take quite a while. So let's see if the workflow started. We're going to go into it. Because I set the workflow to start on item creation, as soon as I created the item, SharePoint's timer job started the workflow. And now you can see that my status changed to holiday approval started, and a task has been assigned to Mark's. By the way, the user that I'm logged in as is called Mark, to Mark's manager, which is Vlad. However, this is pretty simple. Here I have a list called a holiday calendar. What my workflow does in it is that every time a holiday request is created, it's going to create an item in the holiday calendar. As long as the item is pending, the color is going to be purple. As soon as the item is approved, the color is going to change to green. So if I go in as Vlad over here. I get a new holiday request. Like I said, I'll show you that I have the task, but I cannot show you the email because the webinar would take 24 hours. So I go to my holiday calendar and okay, I see that Mark IT guy has requested a holiday. However, he's at the same time as Mary that I already approved. So then I can decide, I can easily view that I'll have 2 people now working for Thursday the 4th. So that gives manager a good view of who do they have working and how many vacations do they approve. And afterwards, after I approve my task, the workflow is going to go in the background. Let me approve it. It might take a while. Let me go back to this guy's screen. And as soon as the workflow is approved, the calendar item is going to change to green. So the next time somebody asks for a vacation, the manager can easily see that, okay, he has 2 people on vacation at the same time. Okay, while we wait for this to end, because SharePoint Designer doesn't, there we go, I think it's done. Come on, SharePoint. Okay, while we wait for this to add, there we go. It finally turned green because the task is over. So now if I have somebody else requesting me time, at this stage I can see that I already have 2 people gone, so I don't have to approve it. Now let's open up SharePoint Designer and see how we did it in the background. I have SharePoint Designer here. I'll go into my workflows and I will go into the holiday approval workflow, which is over here. First of all, I'll just show you that in the start options over here, this is where I have the manually started when an item is created or when an item is changed. Those are my start types. So now you can see that the workflow started alone because I told it to start when an item is created. Let's edit the workflow. So as you see, the first thing you're going to realize is that I have 2 big steps in my workflow. I have step 1 and also I have an impersonation step. What is an impersonation step? By default, when you run a SharePoint workflow, the workflow is going to run with the account that launched the workflow. So if my Mark account created a holiday request and then all the items, all the steps by default are going to be modified or going to be done with Mark's account. So if in our workflow we create a new list item like we did over here, the creator is going to be Mark. However, what happens if Mark doesn't have access to that list? You can see that if we go in here with Mark on holiday calendar, he can view all those items, but he cannot add a new event because he's view only. And we do not want people to add items. We do not want people to add their own holidays. We only want to do it automated. So that's why here I did an impersonation step. Everything in an impersonation step will run as the workflow order. So if you create it with your admin account or with your username, everything that's going to be done during this step is going to be done as the workflow order. Okay, now let's look at the steps that we did. First step is setting the workflow status to holiday approval started. And this workflow, we don't really need it. However, setting the workflow status can be a very good tool to let people know where their workflow is at. In our case, we only have one level, so only one person has to approve, so it's not that long. But imagine you have 4 levels of managing or 4 different departments having to approve or do your request. So that would mean you want to know as a user that, okay, my first manager approved, I'm waiting on the second manager, or I'm waiting on the third manager. That way you can easily, the user doesn't only have to have a started and completed. They can always see where their workflow is at. Our second item is finding the manager of a certain user. Finding the manager is an out-of-the-box SharePoint Designer action. It goes to the SharePoint user profile, which are linked to the Active Directory. So if you want this function to work properly, you really need to have your user profile set up properly and your Active Directory as well in the background. I have been to a lot of clients who unfortunately their Active Directory is not set up right. So even if you want to use those functions in SharePoint, people would have to enter them manually in the SharePoint user profile, and trust me, that's pretty painful. So let me delete this action, and you can see that we find the manager of the current item. So basically, the user who created the current item, because he's the one doing the request for a vacation, and we're going to save it in a variable called manager. Afterwards, what we will do, we will create an item. So this is also a SharePoint Designer action in the holiday calendar list, and we're going to save that item in a variable. So this way we can easily access it after. If we ever want to change a field, or if we ever want to modify or delete it, it's going to be very easy for us to actually take that ID, take that list item we just created, and play with it. Also, you see when we create a new item, we go in holiday calendar over here, and you can see that we can set up the fields. For example, I wanted my title to be the created by, so the name of the person who created the request, as well as let me go over here, as the current type of absence. So if we go back in the calendar, you can see that I have Mark IT Guy as the title, so I can see who's gone on vacation and what kind of time. So I can easily see if somebody's gone for a medical day, only for a day, or if somebody's gone for 9 months for maternity. So I can easily see that in my calendar. However, you can customize it however you want for your business needs. Okay, and then I'm starting an approval process. Starting an approval process is also a SharePoint Designer out-of-the-box action. And I'm starting an approval process on the current item, so on the holiday request, with manager, because the manager is the only one that I want to approve. If I want, I can add more people here. For example, let's say I want to, if I want to add this guy over here as a second approver, I can easily do it. However, in this case, I only want my manager, and I can also add some instructions. For example, hello, current item created by, so the name of the person who created the item has requested to be absent from the start date to the end date specified in his request. And you can view all the pending and approved calendars in the holiday calendar. So when the manager sees the task, he can easily see that those are the instructions without even having to go to the item necessarily. Now let's take a look at our approval process. I don't have a lot of customizations in this screen of the approval process, but you can see that I have my two outcomes. The manager can either approve or reject the holiday request. And let's take a look at changing the behavior of a single task. That's where we can add custom actions to the out-of-the-box approval process, so we can do more. We want to always customize it for our needs. So then, if let's say you want to log stuff, we can log stuff to the workflow history list. So this is very useful for debugging. If you want to show variables, or if you want to show stuff like that, you can easily do it. You can email a task notification, for example. If you want to email manager something nice with adding some HTML and stuff like that, you can also send him. And you can send, this is task notification, so this is going to have the link to the actual task. And then you have a email. So this is basically an email without adding the link to the task. And the stuff that we care the most about in this workflow is what happens when the outcome is approved. So as soon as the manager approves, we want to update an item in the holiday calendar. So this is our list. What do we want to update? I have a custom field in that calendar called approved. So I want to change that field to yes. And also, SharePoint Designer is going to ask me, what item do you want to change? I cannot change all your fields to approved yes. So that's when you say, I want the field whose ID is the variable we created. Like I told you before, we saved the new item we created in a variable so we can easily access it afterwards. And also, if the outcome is rejected, I can easily delete an item in the holiday calendar. So as soon as I delete it, as soon as the manager deletes or rejects the holiday request, the item is going to be deleted. However, in your business, maybe you have to keep all those. So maybe you can say, change the field approved to no, and then keep a history of all the stuff you did. This is really up to you to customize for your businesses. Okay, now let's take a look at our second workflow. Let me start the slides. Okay, so our second approval is a purchase approval workflow. Why did we create a purchase approval workflow? Because every company has to buy stuff, and oftentimes it's the employees who will make the purchase. However, they have to get approved. And this one is a really interesting workflow because the person who approves it is not always the same. It's going to be depending on the amount. And also, you don't have the same number of approvals needed every time. So if you buy something for $200 or if you buy something for $20,000, you're not going to have the same person saying yes. As much as the amount goes up, you're going to need more people or more important people approving. Some constraints are, how do I set up the limits to be dynamic? We don't want to go in the workflow and change stuff in the workflow every time the company says, okay, the new bracket for only your manager can approve just went up $1,000. You don't want to necessarily go in the workflow every time your company changes that. And also in the workflow, where do we get all this information from without hard coding it? Because we don't want to hard code it. We want to have like a settings list from where we can look and get all our information. So our workflow will look something like this, if you want to put it on the visual diagram. As soon as the workflow starts, we're going to do a condition on the amount. So if the amount is between $0 and $5,000, we're only going to start an approval process with our manager. However, if it's between $5,000 and $20,000, you have to start an approval process with the manager and his manager. So you have a two-level approval workflow. And if it's over $20,000, you have to start a workflow approval process with 3 levels of manager. So your manager, his manager, and the above manager. So now, enough theory, let's take a look at the demo. I like to show you stuff, how it works in the real SharePoint, because I know theory is not the most fun part ever of SharePoint. So, okay. So now I'm with, let me log in as Mary over here, and let's go to the purchase approval workflow. Like I did with the past workflow, I will first show you the demo, and then I will show you how we did it in the background. Let me create a new purchase approval request. I'll title it New Mouses for IT, vendor Logitech. It's going to be for $15,000 because they're really expensive mouses. They want the best. I'll click on Save. And now SharePoint Online, I chose to make the workflow start on creation. So workflow is going to start. While this starts, I'll show you this settings list I have over here. And this, you're going to be able to customize it a lot more in your company. I'm just showing you the tips on how to use a settings list. See, here I have 3 items. I have expense level low, medium, high. And for my company, low is between $0 and $5,000. And I only need 1 approval level. So my direct manager can approve any purchase between $0 and $5,000. However, between $5,000 and $20,000, I need 2 approval levels. So my manager cannot approve it alone. I need 2 people to approve it. So my manager and the manager above him. Lastly, the high between 20,000 and 100,000, it's 3 levels. So 3 levels of management above me, because it's a really important purchase and it's a lot of money for the company. Let's see if it started. And so this, if we look at our settings, since it falls in the medium, we should have 2 levels of approval. So we have the purchase approval workflow started. We look into it, and okay, Mark IT guy, if we look at the hierarchy of my company, Mark IT guy is the manager of Mary, so he's the one to get the first task. Let me log in as him, refresh the page, and you see that I have a please approve the purchase task. I go into it, I don't have anything special, I'll just approve it. Let me just approve it, and once it's approved, the workflow is going to see that it's a 2-level approval process, so then it's going to launch another approval process to the manager of Mark IT guy, which is Vlad. So we're gonna wait for it to finish. Okay, SharePoint Online is taking some time today, so I'm already going to go into SharePoint Designer and show you a bit how it works in the background. Okay. So now I go into my purchase approval workflow. I'll edit my workflow. And as you can see, first of all, what do? I set up my purchase approval workflow started, because I want to let the people know that, okay, the workflow has started. We started the approval process for your workflow. Then I want to create a variable called purchase cost. This is basically what the amount is. So if we look at the list, is the amount of the purchase. So then we can easily create conditions based on this variable. And then, because we'll need at least 1 level of management approval in any of the cases. So even if it's low, medium, high expense, we're always going to need at least 1 manager. So I'm going to get the manager right away and save it in the manager. Then we're going to start an if statement. What do we want to check? If the variable purchase cost, so the amount of money is less than, then we're going to look, as you can see, we can have data sources. So data sources is all the lists available in our SharePoint site. And I want to check the high limit. I want basically, if we look at it from a more visual way, I want to see if is the amount higher or lower than this. Because if the amount is lower than this, I only need 1 approval process. So right here, I only need 1 approval process, so I'm going to log. This is useful for debugging. You can take it off afterwards. So I only have 1 approval process, so I'm going to start an approval process on the current item with the manager. So only have the manager. Otherwise, and if the purchase cost is less than the high limit, and you might ask yourself, how do I get those items? How do I know which one I'm comparing it with to? So you can see that I hard-coded the ID of the item. So I'm going to get the item in the purchase settings list with ID 2. And because I know I created them in order, I know this is ID 1, ID 2, and ID 3. So I can easily see, okay, if it's not the first one, if it's higher than the first one, let's look at the second one. So I'll do the same thing. However, in this one I have 2 approvers. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to find the manager of my manager. So I'll find the manager of the manager we had over here, and I'll save it into manager 1. Also, as most of you know, I have never been good with variables naming, so you're going to see a lot of manager, manager 1, manager 2 in my workflows. If you're doing production workflows, I highly advise to put real variables names such as second level manager or stuff like that. This will help you when you go back to your workflow in 2 years. This will help you see, okay, this is what this variable is. In my case, manager 1 doesn't tell you a lot. Then we'll start a purchase approval with 2 approvers on the current item with, and you can see that here what we did is we added 2 people. So after the first person approves, it's going to go to the second person. And also you have the choice. Do you want the approval process to be serial? So do you want the first level manager to approve, and after he approves it goes to the second one, or you want the task to be sent to both of them at the same time? For example, let's say you don't care one of them can, like, you don't want to filter. Most of the companies, they like it in serial, because if your first level manager does not approve, you don't want to bother your second level manager. So that's why I chose serial. However, you can send it to both of them at the same time. It will probably improve the speed, and as soon as one of them rejects it, the purchase approval is going to be rejected anyway. So then right here, we also have the same thing. Okay, if it's less than the high limit of ID number 3, we're going to find the managers and start the workflow approval on it, and at the end we're going to make it completed. So now let's just go back here. I'll refresh this page, and now I should have the approval. Let me just go to Mary over here. I'll refresh the page and show you that, okay, after her first level manager approved it, now it went to Vlad because I'm the manager of Mark IT guy. So let me go in as Vlad. I'll approve it. And because it's under $20,000, as soon as I approve it, the item is going to be approved. We don't need a third level approval process. Let's go to, and this is about it for the second workflow. I'm not going to wait for it to finish because I really want to get done on time, and I don't want to keep you guys more than the 1 hour I'm already taking you today. So I will go at the third workflow. Third workflow is onboarding. Why an onboarding workflow? Because every client that I have been to lately, they need an onboarding workflow. Onboarding workflows have become more and more popular because of all the people and departments involved when a new employee joins the company. So the problem with onboarding is, in general, is that you have so many different departments involved. When you have a new employee come in, you have HR, accounting, operations, IT, and a lot more involved. And getting them all to fill in the information really fast can really be a hassle because they have their priorities, and sometimes they get lost for emails. You send them an email, hey, can you create me a username and password for this guy coming in this date? They don't necessarily take that into their priorities. We have to automate this in a certain way. And also what they hate to have to fill in the information in 5 places. So do not tell the IT guys, okay, you have to enter his username and password into 5 different places. After a while, they're only going to do it in 1 place because it's not efficient and it's boring. So what we want to do in our workflow is that we want to do something like this. So first of all, we collect the data from HR because HR are the ones who will launch the process. So they're going to put the start date, the end date, the manager, the title, and all that stuff. And then it's going to go to the IT people. We're going to ask the IT people to give us information on the username and password, on the email and stuff like that. And then once they give us this information, we're going to update the item. The item we created at the beginning, we're going to update it using the workflow. And then we're going to collect the data from operations and update the item as well. So let's go into SharePoint. And I think my workflow, let me just show you real fast that my purchase approval workflow completed because Vlad approved, so here's the second one to approve, and now it's completed. Okay. Onboarding. Again, I'll show you the demo first, and afterwards I'll show you how it works in the background. As you can see, I have quite a lot of fields over here. So I have the employee ID, first name, last name, department manager, username, password, and all the information that my company needs when a new employee joins. However, since I am human resources, why would I need to see those fields? So what I did on the new item pop-up, I hid all the fields that are not needed for human resources because they're the only ones who actually are going to launch a new employee onboarding process. So let's put some information in. Vlad Catrinescu, Department IT. Who's my manager? Let's say the CEO is my manager, and I'm starting on the 9th. Okay, so the workflow is going to start as soon as we create the item, and what it's going to do is going to assign it to a SharePoint group called the IT people. So you can send a custom email directly to the task. So everybody, for example, what a lot of companies do for this workflow is that they do a custom email sent to their help desk software, because most help desk software can create tickets directly from emails. So you can make your workflow send an email to the IT, so it creates to your help desk software, so it creates a ticket. Okay, so I have it assigned to IT people. I'm not sending an email in this particular case, so let me go in as the IT guy. I can go in my tasks, and you can see that I have a new task. And what I'll also want to show you real fast over here is that when I go on home on the onboarding, even if I try to edit the item, I did it on purpose, I cannot change the username and password fields. I can only put the stuff that HR has to do. And you can see that when an IT guy comes in and he has to fill in the information, I have some custom fields down here that cannot be blank, so they're required. So I have a username, password, and email. So let's say I put my username, Vlad Catrinescu. I put the password webinar123, and then my email is going to be vlad@catrinescu@webinar.com, for example, and I'm going to approve the task. You can see that in this case, how can I approve a new employee? Like, who am I in IT to having to approve a new employee? So I'll show you how to change those buttons afterwards, because approve and reject doesn't make sense in this scenario. So I'm going to approve it. What the workflow is going to do in the background is going to go to that item that we created and that we cannot modify all the fields, and it's actually going to go and add the information we got from this workflow. It's going to add it to that item. So okay, it's already done. Onboarding. You can see that I have my username, my password, and my email added to the field. So when I open it, I can see all the information. Now our next step is waiting on operations. So I'll just go with my admin account and pick this one up. Home. Let's see my task, and let's see what it asks us to do. So this one has a title, which is already better. So it says, please assign phone number and office. Okay, so I have the new employee. I can see that this is for employee ID 10,005. So, and I also have two custom names, two custom fields. I have the mobile phone and the office number. So let me give him a phone number and also an office number. Let's say he's going to see him B302. You can see that I changed the buttons over here because, like I said before, approve and reject makes no sense in this case. So now I have done or need more information. Let's say the HR didn't fill all the required fields, or the HR demand doesn't make any sense, or stuff like that. You can put need more information, and it's going to ask the HR. It's going to basically cancel the process. So let me click done. Workflow is going to add all the information into the original field, and then we're able to have all the information about our employee in one place, so we can easily show it to him afterwards. You can create a customized email. Let's say as soon as his email is created, you can send him the word of the CEO, or all the automatic papers you usually give to him on the first day. You can send them all to him by email if you want to. So now let's look on SharePoint Designer to know how we did it. Workflows, Oops. New onboarding procedure. And let's edit the workflow. Here you can see that since I have more departments, this is the first workflow where I have different departments working on the same item. So this is good. I changed the status to started, waiting on IT, and waiting on operations. So if HR ever wants to go to the list and say like, okay, why isn't my user like finished yet? Why don't I have all the information? You can easily see, okay, I'm waiting for IT. IT didn't do their job, so I know who to go talk to, so they hurry up. Okay, so what I did was pretty easy. I started again an approval process, because an approval process is a good out-of-the-box way to start a task, basically. So instead of starting a task process from the bottom, you can start it over here. And I'm going to start it with the IT people. So it's a SharePoint group. And what I did special in this workflow is that I created task form fields. So those are the fields that you saw earlier, the username, password, and email. If you want to create a new field, you only have to go new over here. You name it as you want, and then you can choose, do you want to make it required or no. I'm going to cancel, and let's go to change the behavior of a single task. Once they fill in those information, so once it's done, I want to update the current item. So I want to update the item that I'm running a workflow on with the variables that I just got. So I want to set the username field to the variable that I got from the current task called username. So then your workflow, as your workflow goes through departments, they're all going to update your central item. So all your information is going to be there. Let's go back to the workflow and let's go at the operations. And this is where I changed the buttons. So for example, instead of approve or reject, I can rename it and said that done or finished. So I can change what people see when they basically when they accept the task, when they're done with it, because it's not always an approve or reject. That makes no sense in this scenario, at least. So you can easily modify that as well. And in the background, I have two required variables again, and when the workflow is done, I just update the current item. Okay, we only have a few minutes left. So before we go, I want to show you that this was SharePoint Designer, but let's see how we can create this workflow using Datapolis. As we talked at the first three parts of the theory, you can either create workflows with SharePoint Designer, Visual Studio, or third-party workflow software such as Datapolis. So let me show you the demo again. And this is a very basic workflow that I did. I only maybe used 1%, not even, of Datapolis feature. So again, let me, Mr. Vlad Catrinescu, department is going to be IT, manager is going to be, I'm going to be my own manager, and this is the test site they provided me free, so I don't have access to the Active Directory and I don't want to go on the server, play with it too much, so that's why I didn't hit those fields yet, but you can do it if you want to. Okay, now you can see that my workflow is already in progress. So when I go over here, I have a contextual menu that goes, okay, from here I want to go to the IT activities. Since I'm also an IT person, I'm a full control administrator, I'll enter the password, which is password, and the username, which is Vlad@C. I'm going to click confirm, and my item is going to be updated. That was easy, that was fast. Let me show you real fast how I did the workflow, and honestly it took me about 3 seconds to do it. I open up their designer. Once it opens up, I'll show you what I have. So first of all, as soon as the item is created, I'll have an initial action. So the first initial action is going to go to a state, to a new employee state. And I don't have much. I could add stuff over here, but since it's such a simple workflow to do with Datapolis, I didn't have to do anything. And here's where I have most of my stuff. So I have my IT activities. In my IT activities, I created a form and I added 2 variables. So I have my password field and my username field. If I want to add a new field that people have to fill, I just add a new variable, let's say MSDN login. I just add it, okay, and then I could add it to my form and stuff like that. And also, where the fun part is the activities. As you can see in my workflow, I have the edit items part. So I basically tell them to change the field values, change the username to the variable username and the password to the variable password. So I really didn't do much, but where the added value of the third-party product comes in is, for example, when I go in permissions over here, I could add a user directly into Active Directory. So as soon as HR starts the process, instead of bugging the IT people to create my Active Directory users, I can tell my workflow to create it directly. Of course, this will have to be set up with IT and everything the first time, but after that, they don't have to create accounts ever again. So that's a big win. You can also run PowerShell scripts. So, for example, as you know, all the Microsoft software runs on PowerShell, and PowerShell is a very powerful tool. You could even create Exchange mailboxes with remote PowerShell and stuff like that. So after they edit the item, the workflow ends, and this is the small workflow I did with Datapolis. Took me about 30 seconds, and it works. Now I see that there are 8 minutes left in the webinar, so I'm going to go to the questions and answer period. So let me see. What do I have over here? And before we go, just wanted to tell that if you ever have any other questions that I did not answer, what I did is that most of you probably know SharePointCommunity.net. I created a discussion for follow-up questions. So if there are any questions that I cannot answer today, or you have to go, you can always go on this discussion and ask your questions, and I will try to, hi Dave, I'll try to answer them as soon as possible today, and I'll also add the YouTube link in the discussion as soon as it's available. Okay, so back to the questions and answer. Okay, let me, okay, first question is, is there any process or something that we can debug our workflow apart from seeing the workflow history and workflow list? What if it's stuck somewhere? In SharePoint Designer, your most useful tool to debugging is usually logging stuff. For example, you create a variable, you log the stuff, and that's where you can see that if you have any errors. Since it's really made for power users and business users, you cannot really do try catch or stuff like that. So your best bet is actually to log stuff and then see where it sucks and then try to see why. And also, if you ever have like a system stuck, for example, you're trying to make it update a field and it fails with unexpected error, you can always talk to your admin and look in the ULS logs, because it's going to log stuff over there if ever it fails. Okay, next question. What was the reasoning behind building a workflows as 2010 workflows instead of 2013? The reason is pretty simple. SharePoint Server 2013 workflow mode is a lot better than 2010, and I agree with that. However, I wanted to show simple workflows, and I wanted a lot more people to be able to use them in their environment. Unfortunately, not everyone is on SharePoint Server 2013 yet, so I wanted to show something that they can use whether they have 2010, 2013, or SharePoint Online. I hope this answers your questions. Any other questions? We have 5 minutes left, so please do not hesitate. Also, I think Maxiej is going to do a poll, so you can give me feedback. Please give me honest feedback. I really want to know what you think about the webinar, what do you think about the workflows and all this stuff. So please be honest, even if you liked it or you didn't, tell me the truth.
Yes, and I also have a couple of questions: will the recorded sessions be available after this webinar? Yes, I can answer. It will be recorded. It is recorded at this very moment, and it will be available on YouTube. I will send a link to each of you, both those who were present and both those who missed the webinar. So you should not worry about it. You can watch this webinar easily in your free time. And we have another questions coming up. Is there an easy way to deploy a workflow across multiple environments? Could you answer this one, Vlad?
The easiest way, if it's a reusable workflow, yes, you could package it. If it's a Visual Studio workflow, you could package it as a WSP. However, a list workflow like the ones we did today, you cannot give it to multiple environments because of the fact that they really depend on the list that they have been created with.
Okay, I have another question coming. Can you open Datapolis solution once more and show us an involved workflow outline?
Can you repeat the last part again?
Can you open Datapolis solution and show us an involved workflow outline, Vlad?
Do you see? I think you should be able to see the outline right now. Or do you want to see the activities part in the IT activities over here?
Now there's a request for something more complicated, but now we will get back to this in a minute. In the meantime, what is the advantage in using Visual Studio?
Visual Studio, you can have, like say you want to have try catches, you want to do as long as an item doesn't change field, you can create timer jobs, you can play with firm objects, so you have all the power of SharePoint, changing stuff. For example, if you want to change stuff in another web application, in another site collection. So you have that power of accessing all your farm, and you can also have a lot more complicated code. So for example, like say you have an approval process. Well, it has been solved a lot with stages in SharePoint Server 2013 if you use that model. However, you can more easily do complicated stages, complicated conditions, and stuff that interacts with stuff outside your site. SharePoint Designer has a limit of your current site. It cannot go outside that. Visual Studio can go to the site collection, to other sites, to your farm, and stuff like that.
Okay, and in the meantime, I believe more questions will show up. And
do you want to show the Datapolis part, Maciej? If I didn't answer it properly?
Okay, so now I was now going to tell that you can see more complicated examples on our test sites, just like the one now Vlad is using. It is very minute. Now test sites are free. They are accessible to anyone, now free of charge. So you can register at SharePoint2013.datapolis.com. So now this is the main test site.
I'll sign out and I'll just show you guys how, if you want to go, you go on their site, SharePoint2013.datapolis.com, and then you can register, and they're going to send you a URL as long as with username and password, so you can sign in and play with their workflow software or do whatever you want on their sites. So it's really easy. Then you just come, log in, and you're good to go. And you also have some built-in examples. So like I chose to make the onboarding one really easy because I wanted to show you exactly what I did in SharePoint Designer. However, you have one that they made over here which is a bit more complicated, a bit more cool. You have a lot more stuff going on, and they also have a video explaining how they did it. So you have an onboarding video right here, and they show you how they built their workflow.
Yes, we have also an onboarding sample workflow, which is a bit more complex than the one Vlad just showed. We also have leave request sample workflow, and to all users of the online test site, there are available some video tutorials about how to use our solution, how to create simple workflows, how to utilize such functionalities as applications, role modules, or now using lookups and variables. Everything is available there. Okay, so I will launch a short poll now to evaluate our webinar to see now did you like it or not. Now, please be honest. And I have another question for Vlad. I take it you can create custom actions.
Yes, you can create custom actions with SharePoint Designer. I did not cover them in this webinar because the time was very limited. However, yes, you can create custom actions with SharePoint Designer. I'll share a link. I'll put it in the discussion on SharePoint community over here. I'll share a link with some good tutorials on how to create custom actions with SharePoint Designer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just going to put a short disclaimer here that if you mark this in the poll, you can expect that we may write back to you and walk through on how we can help you, because now we would be glad to assist you with anything you need on SharePoint workflows, and similar things. And now feel free to create your own sites, lists, libraries, and of course connect them with Datapolis workflows on our test sites. Okay, and if you still now feel you have some more time in preparing your questions, now Vlad will create a thread on his website SharePoint community.
The thread is already up, by the way, so if you go on the home site, it's one of the latest discussions. It's called Follow-Up Questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share the link in the chat. I don't know if I can share it to everybody.
Okay, and now if you can, that I will.
I sent it to you privately, so you can share it to everybody.
Okay, and it's done. You'll have a link right now.
So you can all go ask questions, anything you want. I'm also going to update it with the URL to the video. So if you ever want to watch it again and have questions, how I did the calendar colors or stuff like that, please feel free. I'll be more than happy to answer you and guide you.
Yes, I will upload the recording to YouTube and then post a link when it will be available. Okay, just checking up if there are some more questions. Not at the moment, so I guess now we don't need to keep you any more longer. So thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Vlad, for this great presentation.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you everybody. Thank you everybody for taking 1 hour out of your day to listen to me. It's really appreciated. And I hope I'm going to see you all in real person at a presentation close to you. Yes.
We are, of course, available under email or on the SharePoint community. If you now wish to know anything more, just write to me or to Vlad. We'll do the best to help you. So, thank you one more time, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.